go off camera until we're ready to introduce you as the presenter after Cedar.
Okay.
And then I'll go ahead and kind of kick things off. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the June Reed cohort meeting. I'm Pete Irvin, one of the volunteer Reed cohort managers, and thanks for joining us this morning. As you know, the cohort is a community of folks that care about resource advising, and we've got a pretty great session today once we get through a few technological glitches. As we get started, sort of a slower start than normal, maybe, to the main fire season, if there is such a thing anymore. Plenty of things going on, but we're still at preparedness level 2 nationally, supporting fires to our northern borders. The SIT report I looked at said we got 20 crews, 3 IMTs, 35 or 38 smoke jumpers, and a bunch of miscellaneous overhead up in Alberta and other places north of the border. So just because it's a little later than normal, just because we had a little bit better moisture conditions over the winter doesn't mean that we won't have another trying season. So again, welcome to the Reed cohort call for June. And without further ado, I'll kick it over to Cedar Drake, coming off another successful virtual N9042 course with a couple important announcements for us. Cedar, I am seeing your screen, and take it away.
All right, sounds good, Pete. Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to share a couple new innovations that have been developed over the last 6 months, which I think will be of great benefit to the resource advisor community in general. So the first one is what we're calling the Reed trainee spreadsheet. And to access this, you just go to the Reed cohort Google Drive, which I'm sure all of you are well familiar with. And you're going to go right in here to the Reed Reef requests folder. And this is the same folder where you will find what we call the Reed Reef requests spreadsheet. This is where lead reads. Excuse me? Yeah, this is the same location where lead reads who are on incidents can post needs that they might have for specific Reed Reef ARC. Oh, am I offline? You guys able to hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Okay, got a message here that I'm offline. All right, just wanted to make sure. So anyways, yeah, so this Reed Reef request, this is where lead reads on incidents can, indicate that they have specific needs. And we decided this year to try out kind of a pilot project for 1 year and see if we could create something analogous here for trainees, because we're getting lots of trainees coming into the Reed world. So when you click on this, you'll end up on a page like this one. And this is the actual spreadsheet, and you can see that there's a number of people who have already submitted requests to be included on this form. The directions here are indicated on the top, so make sure you read that before you go through and populate this. But the way it works is this row here that's in yellow, this is actually a hyperlink. And when you click on this hyperlink, it will take you to a form where you can input your information. So just to clarify, folks are not going to be able to populate this spreadsheet themselves. So in order to populate, you're going to have to click on this link. That will then take you to this Microsoft form. Again, the same instructions are on the top here. I'll go over them in just a second, but then you will go and enter all of the relevant information that will be included on the spreadsheet here and submit it. This then goes to myself and Jessica Riesenberg from the BLM, and we are going to then make sure that everything is correct in that request, and then we will transfer that information over here to the spreadsheet. Important point to recognize here, because we want to make sure that the spreadsheet is always up to date and current. We are asking that people only submit a request when they are actually available for an assignment. And being available for an assignment means that you have permission from your supervisor. It means you've got whatever those quals that you want to be considered for in a training position, that you've got that on your red card, you've got the red card in hand, you've got your bags packed, and most importantly, that you are actually showing as available nationally in IROC. Okay, so what we don't want is people to add an entry here and say, oh yeah, I'm available like August 31st, but it's only June, right? We're not looking for that. We're looking for people that are literally ready to go on an assignment now, because we want this to be a location that is current, so that other Reed, Reefs, ARCs out there who are heading out on assignment, who are willing to pick up a trainee, can look at this list quickly and then reach out to folks individually, or likewise lead reads on incidents who are willing to support more trainees can get that information right away. So a couple of the other ground rules, I'm just going to read this out to you. This spreadsheet is an unofficial job aid, and it's intended to assist Reed, Reef, and ARC trainees in connecting with trainee assignments on wildland fire and all hazard incidents. Before submitting this form, all trainees must have the appropriate training qualifications listed on their red card, have secured supervisor approval to assist on an incident, and be prepared to commit to a 14-day assignment, and have made themselves available in IROC. Participation in this spreadsheet in no way ensures assignment to an incident. Upon completion of this form, you consent to inform the trainee spreadsheet coordinators if you are no longer available for a trainee assignment within the 14-day period following the submission of this form. All entries older than 14 days will be automatically removed from the spreadsheet, and trainees will need to resubmit this form to be listed as available on the spreadsheet again. And again, we remind folks, don't complete this form unless you're currently listed as available for assignment in IROC. So just to go over that again, when you submit one of these forms, we will indicate on this left column here what the date was that it was submitted, and then generally starting the next day, we will then go out 14 days from there, and then this column indicates the date that your request is going to be removed from the spreadsheet, and it's going to be added to this other tab here in the bottom. So if you end up getting picked up for an incident, if you end up finding out that you're no longer available for an incident, please reach out to Jessica or myself, and our names are up there on the form. At the bottom of this form, you can find our email addresses, and then that way we know to take you off the list, because again, we want to keep it current. If we don't hear back anything from you, then we will just automatically remove yourself from the spreadsheet on this date that you see in column B. If after that 14-day period you want to be included again on the spreadsheet, then all you have to do is go and fill out another one of these forms, and we can put you right back on there. So again, this is just a pilot, just a test opportunity here. We're recognizing that there's lots of trainees coming into the system. We want to help people connect on incidents. We recognize next year that once the position task books come online for the different resource advisor positions, we're going to have a lot of trainees that are going to need to get experience. So we're doing whatever we can to help facilitate and assist trainees to get out there and get some on the job experience. Are there any questions? Yes, I see. Can we send the link to the form? Yes, I will add that in there unless someone has already done that. And again, the link to the actual form is on the spreadsheet here. in this yellow column, all you have to do is sort of go hover over it, and you can click on it there, and that will take you right to the form there as well. Are there any questions on the trainee spreadsheet? I guess the other thing I'll add is, just recognize that this is entirely a voluntary thing that Jessica and I are taking on this year. So please be patient with us if it takes a day or two to get your request put up on the spreadsheet. We will get to it. It's automated in a way that it sends us an email every time a form is submitted. But if it gets to be a busy part of fire season, then it could be a couple days for us to get that up there. Are you guys able to hear me still? Just making sure I'm not talking to myself.
Yeah, I sure can.
We got you.
And
Cool.
Jessica put the link in the chat, so
Awesome.
good there.
Thanks, Jessica. All right, moving along to the next product. So the NWCG Resource Advisor Subcommittee is sponsoring what we're calling the Resource Advisor Learning Library. And I'll add a link to this one as well in a minute. Or I can do it right now, actually. What you need to access this site is a Wildland Fire Learning Portal account. And all you have to do is click on that link that I just put in the chat. And that will take you to the Wildland Fire Learning Portal. You enter in your account information. If you don't have account information on that page, I think at the bottom there's a button to set up an account. It's free. It's available to anyone. If you don't have a federal government account, it might take a couple days for them to set the account up for you, but you will get an account. And then all I have to do is just go to this link that I've put in the chat, and that will take you automatically to the Learning Library. So what the Learning Library is basically a searchable video library for all type of videos that are related to resource advising. So when you get here for the first time, there's a couple requirements that we set up that you read sort of this, what is the Learning Library? How do I use it document? You just have to do this one time. We've got a brief user survey just to get a sense of how many people are using this resource and why and how they're using it. We've got an optional one to view here that just talks about the READ cohort and the READ subcommittee, location where you can express feedback, or if you've got videos that you would think might be a good fit for the Learning Library, you can post those URLs here and we'll take a look at those. And then we've got the actual keywords and category tags for searching for videos. So the guts of this really lives down here at the very bottom. When you click on this, you get to the Learning Library. Currently, we've got about 85 videos in here, and you can search for them in all different ways. You can just search for them for a keyword that would be associated with the actual title of the video. As I showed you before, down here, maybe I'll just show you this now. This document will show you all the different video categories that the videos have been tagged with. So there's kind of like headings associated with them and other tags as well. These would be more like a category. And then we kind of go down and actually apply different tags to each of the videos. And so these are sort of the things that you can search on. You can also search by the author, and I think probably even the date. So anything that's in here, or any of those tags, you can see the tags here at the bottom that are associated with each video. So if I put in, for example, invasives, I come up with a number of videos here about how resource advisors can work with invasives either before wildfires, during wildfires, after wildfires. Most of these videos come from webinar recordings or from some of the videos that we produced for the online N9042 course. But really, and some of them just come purely off the internet. They could really come from anywhere. So if any of you have recorded presentations or other videos that you think would be really good fit for this, just reach out to me Cedar_Drake at mps.gov. And I'll put that in the chat here as well. And we will vet that video with the working group for the READ subcommittee and determine if that's an appropriate fit or not. Let's say I put something like suppression repair in there and search for that. Then I've got some videos from the N9042 course about suppression repair. Here's one about GIS field data collection during suppression repair. Another one, this is a READ cohort video. So that's another thing I wanted to mention is that from this point forward, all of the READ cohort video recordings, and including this one, will actually be stored here on the READ Learning Library. So this will be a location that you look for that. And all you have to do is essentially search for READ cohort, or probably even just cohort would be good enough. And we don't have all of them in there yet, but we will be getting all of them in there. But you can go through and actually view all of these monthly resource advisor cohort calls in here. So great way to access this information. The intent behind the Learning Library is that this is a location where you can use these videos for trainings, for refreshers, for AARs, or if you're on an incident and you're wondering, I've got issues with retardant, for example, and you need a little bit of like updating yourself on how to deal with retardant. There's some videos in here that could potentially help you with that. So it's, the intent is just to share our knowledge and provide, opportunities for people to just share this knowledge and increase our overall understanding. So are there any questions about either of these products?
Hey, Cedar, this is Pete. There is a question in the chat from Yvonne. Is the Learning Library different from the Vimeo videos from the N9042 class?
So most all of the videos from the N9042 class have been included in the Learning Portal. There are additional videos in the Learning Library that are not in N942 Vimeo showcases. And of course, the benefit with using the Learning Library is that you can search for them much easier. But yes, there's quite a bit of overlap there. And as years go on and we update videos for N9042, we will be putting the updated versions in the Learning Library as well. All right, well, I won't take up any more time. I know Kai has some presentation to share with you. And if you've got any questions, just put my email here in the chat, and I will drop in some links. I guess you've probably got all the links you need already, but if you have any questions, just reach out to me.
Cedar, before we transition over to Kai, I did a poor job of introducing you. Would you tell us name, location, and position?
Sure. My name is Cedar Drake, and currently I work as an ecologist for the Pacific West region for the National Park Service, the Office of Fire and Aviation Management. And my job currently, I'm in a detailed position. My job is mostly focused on resource advising, burned area emergency response, and I do some fire planning, as well as some regional fire ecology support as well. So kind of a mixed bag, but mostly focused on the interface of resource protection and wildland fire management.
Awesome. Thanks, Cedar.
Thank you.
And
Kai, I'm not seeing an email from you here with your presentation. I don't know if you shared that.
Yeah, Cedar. So I wasn't able to email it because it's too big, but I think I got it. So I think I'm good to go. We'll try sharing my screen here once we do a round of introductions, I guess.
that sounds good. Fingers crossed.
All right.
So this is Pete again, your host for today, and it's my privilege to introduce a friend I've never met in person, and that's Kai Allen. Kai has one of maybe the few folks in the country that has wild and scenic river management as a significant part of his position, maybe his primary role. He'll tell us more about that. He is the rogue wild and scenic river planner for the BLM in Southwest Oregon. Background in wild and scenic rivers, in wilderness, in fire as well. Crew boss, helicopter manager, a variety of qualifications. I know Kai, and I've been able to learn from him in several different ways. And one of those was when he presented at the Rivers track of the National Wilderness Skills Institute during COVID in 2021. And beyond that, I'll just say, Kai, thanks for providing me that BLM hat that I use as a visual aid every now and again. With that, Kai, kick it over to you. Thanks for being with us today to talk about wild and scenic rivers and resource advisors.
All right. Hey, great. Thanks, Pete. Sorry for the technical difficulties there, and you're welcome for that hat. We are all interagency, and so it's great to know that everybody's wearing the same hat, regardless of who we work for. So real briefly following up on that, my name's Kai. I'm an outdoor recreation planner. I work on the Rogue National Wild and Scenic River in southwestern Oregon. And I've been doing this for a long time. I actually started working in congressionally designated areas, managing congressionally designated areas, which include national trails and wilderness and national monuments, things like that, in about 1989 or so. Started with the feds, with the U.S. Forest Service. In 1996, I worked most of my career actually for the Forest Service in Region 9, Region 2, and Region 5 for the Forest Service, and now most recently here with the BLM on the Rogue National Wild and Scenic River. So I'm the planner for the river here on the Rogue, and spend 100% of my duties is associated with wild and scenic river management. Also, I spent a lot of my career working in wildland fire management as well. So crew boss, resource advising, aviation management as well. And I'm really glad to see that everybody's here. It's just an extraordinary growth of this profession, the resource advisor profession. When I first started, there were not very many resource advisors. In fact, it was pretty common that I might be the only resource advisor, particularly for wilderness, which has been the resource that I've always participated in as a resource advisor. There might only be one resource advisor on the whole incident. So things have really grown tremendously since I've been involved in this, and I'm really grateful for that. So I had a few tech difficulties here, but I think we got it figured out. Let me see if we can get this PowerPoint started, and we'll get ready to go. Okay, can you see my screen, folks?
Yeah, Kai, this is Pete. I'm seeing it. It's not quite in full slideshow mode. I'm seeing the bar on the side of it,
Okay.
as well as slide.
Let's see if we can't.
Yeah,
Okay.
now we got it. Perfect.
All right. Excellent, great. And I'm going to turn my camera off here while I go through this. And feel free, put your questions in the chat. We're going to try to leave some time at the end to answer some questions and maybe have kind of a little discussion forum. So if I can get through this quickly, we'll leave some time for that as well. Okay, great. So resource advising, resource considerations for national wild and scenic rivers, and how we manage rivers and consider resource values for wild and scenic rivers when we're performing on an incident. The objectives for today, we'll talk about the National System of Wild and Scenic Rivers, what it is and what it does, some of the parameters of it. We'll talk about some key features and requirements, statutory requirements of the 1968 Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. Try to establish some familiarity with incident resource considerations for wild and scenic rivers. Talk a little bit about suppression, repair, and emergency stabilization, post-fire stabilization, and wild and scenic rivers. A few tips on some best practices and lessons learned. and then some time, hopefully, for questions and a discussion. So why are we concerned about fire management and wild and scenic rivers? So the national system of wild and scenic rivers and designated rivers included within the system provide a suite of irreplaceable ecosystem services, including clean water, freshwater biodiversity, outdoor recreation, economic and social well-being for those human dimensions of rivers and conserving rivers, scenic appreciation, climate refugia, and cold water resources. This is becoming more and more of a concern, and wild and scenic rivers plays a key role in connectivity for species, for cold water resources, fish and salmon and things like that. Also, landscape connectivity, the ability for species that depend on rivers to be able to move across the landscape and through different spawning, rearing habitats out to the ocean and back up to the mountain lakes. Supporting traditional cultures and values. So rivers are important landscape features that people also depend on. They support centering people's lifeways, traditional lifeways, and social values. Really, really important consideration when we're working in wild and scenic rivers, rivers in general, not just designated rivers. The management actions that we take during incident management can affect the delivery and sustainability of these values for which rivers were added to the national system. So what is the National System of Wild and Scenic Rivers? It is a system of congressionally designated areas. It's a national system. The Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was first passed in 1968. And today, the system consists of 13,413 miles of designated rivers on 226 rivers in 41 states. It was the first national system of river protected areas globally. And rivers are typically managed by the 4 federal river land managing agencies, some states, and also some tribes. Purpose of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was to conserve selected rivers or sections thereof in their free-flowing condition to protect the water quality of such rivers and to fulfill their vital national conservation purposes. So that's some language that comes right from the Act itself. And the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act protects certain rivers with outstanding scenic, recreational, geologic, fish, wildlife, historic, cultural, or other similar values. Consider that less than 0.5% of all the nation's rivers are included in the National System of Wild and Scenic Rivers. These are the endangered species of rivers. Over on the right-hand side, you can see the graph of the designated wild and scenic rivers there at 13,413 miles. There is this listing of rivers called the Nationwide Rivers Inventory that includes 84,000 miles of river. In the United States, there are approximately 860,000 miles of river which have been dammed or diverted, manipulated, channelized in some way. And then the total river mileage in the United States is about 3.5 million river miles. So these wild and scenic rivers are just really, really important landscape features. Down on the bottom side of the graphic is a dam, as a picture from the U.S. Army Corps' nationwide dam inventory, which includes 95,000 major dams in the United States. So these are big dams over 20 feet tall, the major dams in the United States, 95,000. So the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was a response to the development of river resources in the United States, which were critically important, fueled the growth of the United States and the economic enjoyment that we have today. But Congress realized that if the United States continued on this trajectory of modifying all the rivers in the United States, that there would not be any left for other values. Okay, so some of the things that the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act does on designated rivers. They have formal corridor boundaries. So generally it's a 1/4 mile on each side of the river from the center of the river in the lower 48. and then half a mile wide in Alaska if you're working in Alaska. So they have a designated corridor boundary in which the requirements of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act apply. There are several different kinds of wild and scenic rivers. I'm going to go through this pretty quick, but it's something that resource advisors who might be working on wild and scenic rivers should know a little bit about. There are those designated rivers, which are designated by Congress under Section 3A of the Act. There are what are called study rivers. These are congressionally designated study rivers before they get added to the national system. There are agency study rivers. So if you're familiar with the terminology, those are eligible and suitable wild and scenic rivers that were identified during the land management planning process. And then the National Park Service manages what's called the Nationwide Rivers Inventory. And it's an inventory of about 3,000 rivers or so, which are available to be designated by Congress and added to the national system. Lastly, there are rivers that are called Section 2A2 rivers. Those are state administered wild and scenic rivers. So for example, in California, the Smith River or the Klamath River are actually administered by the state of California, national rivers administered by the states. Designated rivers have a comprehensive river management plan. They're required to have a formal plan that describes the management objectives, the practices, monitoring requirements, which also include fire management practices. So if you've got a fire and you're working with wild and scenic rivers, you want to try to seek out that comprehensive river management plan if you can get your hands on it. A lot of times you can find these on the internet as well, so that's very helpful. There are three kinds of rivers, three different types of classification of rivers that depend on the development levels. And they are recreational rivers, scenic rivers, and then wild rivers. Recreational river areas are rivers that may have undergone some impoundment. They have some development associated with them. They typically have roads, development, houses along the shoreline. Kind of the highest level of development of those segments of rivers within the system. Next, lower down in terms of development are scenic river areas. And these are rivers with, they're accessible in some places, less than recreational rivers, but with watersheds and shorelines are largely primitive and undeveloped. And lastly, those wild river areas like the Wild Rogue where I work, they are rivers that are free of all impoundments. They're generally inaccessible only by trail. They have essentially primitive conditions, unpolluted waters, and represent a vestige of primitive America. So for example, in wild river areas during a fire, these are the places particularly you would want to prevent dozer lines, let's say, from coming down and entering into the wild and scenic river corridor because you'd be changing the character of that wild river area. So kind of the heart of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is the statutory requirements of Section 10A of the Act, and this is called the agency's protect and enhance mandate. And if you come away from anything from this slideshow, remember this slide. So all agencies must ensure that we are protecting and enhancing water quality, the free-flowing condition of the river, and the outstandingly remarkable values. Outstandingly remarkable values. It's quite a mouthful of a term. And all our actions, we allow for opportunities for efforts that go on that will not substantially interfere with the public use and enjoyment of those values for present and future generations. So we protect and enhance, and we allow things that will not substantially interfere with river values. So here's a wild and scenic river, and someone enjoying the river values of a wild and scenic river. So there's the river values, and then there's that use and enjoyment of river values. That perception of those river values is particularly important when considering fires in wild and scenic rivers. Protect and enhance. So what is this term, outstandingly remarkable values? What are outstandingly remarkable values? Well, they can be a whole suite of things: scenery, wildlife, prehistory, cultural, fish, geology, or this category of other. So for example, scenery or recreation, ecological biodiversity values, mature and old growth forests, kind of the functioning of river ecosystems may be outstandingly remarkable. So we protect and enhance outstandingly remarkable values during an incident. Rivers conserved under the Act, designated rivers have at least one outstandingly remarkable value, or at least usually there's more, but they must have at least one. And these river values are directly river related. So they're located within the river itself or in the immediate uplands of the river. They contribute to ecosystem function of that river. And they owe their location or the existence to the presence of a river. So an outstandingly remarkable value isn't something that you're going to find, a mile away from the river. It has something directly related to that river and its function. ORVs are unique, rare, or exemplary at their within their geographic context, usually at a regional or a national scale. So these are important landscape features that we conserve under the national system. Their baseline condition is typically described at the time of designation. So we're required under the Act to protect and enhance those conditions that existed at the time of designation. And the comprehensive river management plan is required, and it describes how those agencies will meet that statutory requirement to protect and enhance those river values. And for resource advisors, if you're dealing with wild and scenic rivers, you can typically, hopefully, find the ORV descriptions and guidance for managing fire and wild and scenic rivers in that comprehensive river management plan. You may need to look at your unit land and resources management plan or your park plan, the fire management plan, but also the WFDS. So these things related to wild and scenic rivers are supposed to be preloaded into the wildfire decision support system. And you may or may not find that there. Some other provisions of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act that might apply to rivers during fire management operations. Section 7 of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act establishes a standard for those kind of projects that would occur within the river channel or tributaries. And typically it's a prohibition. It's not an outright prohibition, but there's a standard called a direct and adverse effects. So those operations that occur within the channel must not have direct and adverse effects without doing an analysis. Section 10B of the Act talks about this complementary relationship between wild and scenic rivers and designated wilderness. And essentially what happens for designated rivers and wilderness is that you apply both requirements of the Wilderness Act and also the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. And should a conflict arise, you select the most restrictive provision between those two acts. And so for wild and scenic rivers inside wilderness, it is probably the highest and most strict management regime that we have for public lands in the United States. Aside from national parks are pretty strongly preserved as well, but wild and scenic rivers in wilderness have the full force of both acts. Section 12 of the Act, it requires federal actions that take place outside of that corridor boundary on both sides of the river to consider potential effects on river values. So those are those kinds of operations back up in the hills in the watershed that might affect water quality or say fisheries habitat or something like that. That's Section 12 of the Act. And then there's some other parts of the Act that really put a strong emphasis on collaborative and cooperative management of wild and scenic rivers. And so if you consider rivers, there's just a slate of other resource agencies or state, local, and federal jurisdictions that have a role to play in the management of rivers. The Act really emphasizes that collaborative approach. And then lastly, this can be really important. You see the picture there from the Rogue National Wild and Scenic River. Special legislative provisions, or there may be some unique specific conditions that Congress put into the law that designated that river that you want to be aware of. So for example, here on the Rogue Wild and Scenic River, it allows for motorized jet boat use inside the Wild Rogue Wilderness and on the wild designated classified section of the Rogue River. So the special legislative provisions are something to be careful and look for. So what is about rivers and fire? So rivers are generally characterized as dynamic, disturbance-dependent ecosystems. Rivers are accustomed to fire, particularly in the western part of the United States, and they're accustomed to disturbance. So their ecosystem function is characterized by pulse disturbances, so flooding regimes, sedimentation. During a fire, after a fire, we see increased nutrient releases, possibility of flow modification or flow discharge changes to discharge, temperature changes, maybe woody debris, more woody debris entering the system, and short-term impacts on water quality. But those are things that rivers can typically absorb, those short-term disturbances. These are dynamic systems in their natural state. And free-flowing rivers have this character that's really, really important, and it is described as hydrologic connectivity. So that is the ability of the river to move back and forth across its floodplain, laterally, vertically, and also on time scale. So the way that rivers function support those outstandingly remarkable values. And so this notion of free-flowing rivers and connectivity, that ability to connect with the floodplain and to connect with its source to sea connections is really, really important. And we can affect those things during our incident fire management. So for resource advisors on wild and scenic rivers, Reeds and Reefs, who are working in wild and scenic rivers, provide input into the development and application of strategies and tactics which protect and enhance, which is interpreted in regulation as this non-degradation and enhancement framework of those outstandingly remarkable values, free-flowing condition, and water quality. And then we manage to be consistent with river classification, so wild and scenic recreational river segment classification. Of course, managing fire and these resources, whether it's wilderness or wild and scenic rivers, requires this balance between those river value protection requirements and the necessary fire management requirements in order to meet incident objectives. So it's finding that balance between protecting rivers. At the top here, you see a picture of the Salmon Wild and Scenic Rivers in the Klamath National Forest in far northern California, a landscape that has seen a lot of intense wildfire over the years. And protecting those river values, it becomes really, really important in this landscape where there's been so much fire that has occurred. So how do we protect water quality, free-flowing conditions, and ORVs during wildfire incidents? So here's some considerations that some things that we do on wildfire that could affect river values. So aerial retardant comes first to mind. Water quality, fish, things like that. So trying to work with the incident management team and the aviation operation to prevent retardant from entering into wild and scenic rivers, or perhaps their tributaries, depending on those downstream values, fish or salmon, for example. Dozer lines is something to pay attention to with wild and scenic rivers. Typically, you try to keep dozer lines out of the wild and scenic river corridor if you can, or seek alternatives to using dozer line. Perhaps hand line will do. Perhaps there's some geographic barrier that can be used instead of pushing a dozer line down to the edge of the river. This one's really, really important for rivers. So aviation operations and aquatic invasives. So taking care to ensure that we don't spread aquatic invasive species or terrestrial plant species around in our wild and scenic river corridors, washing buckets, developing lists of no dip areas and things like that, not mixing raw water from rivers, say like the Rogue here. We don't allow dipping from the Rogue to go over into the next river basin, which is the Illinois River Basin, because the Rogue has some aquatic invasive species and some plant species in it that we don't want to get into the Illinois Wild and Scenic River. Considerations about burn severity and watershed effects. How much of the landscape is actually burned and at what severity can be a consideration for the protect and enhance those river values. Hazard tree mitigation. So on rivers that have scenery as one of these protected values, you may be involved with selecting or dealing with hazard tree mitigation along roads or power lines, things like that can really affect scenery for a long, long time. Public safety and river closure. So resource advisors might be involved with, say, working with commercial outfitters and on their operations if the river has to be closed, finding alternatives, keeping those folks briefed on conditions, things like that. Wild and scenic rivers are typically can have major economic values to their local communities. Other considerations include historic or cultural structures, protecting those structures, invasive plant management, weed management, hazardous materials, pumping from the river, water use during an incident on wild and scenic rivers. Incident support, that can be a major deal. So like on a river like the Rogue, we often end up getting involved with transporting firefighters down the river to reach the fire line. Tribal lifeways and tribal culture, major consideration for rivers when we're working in rivers. And burnout operations and fire effects. So for example, the intensity of fire, let's say if the river is going to be used as a fire line, maybe trying to work with a team to moderate fire behavior if there's time to do that. Time to prevent fire from damaging riparian areas, or say fire operations on floodplains, for example. So the wild and scenic river system is very diverse. Every river is a little bit different, and it's a national system with a broad range of complexity and considerations. There are designated wild and scenic rivers in Puerto Rico all the way up to Alaska, and every one is different and unique and has a local context. One thing I've noticed with wild and scenic rivers on incidents is you can anticipate unfamiliarity and scarcity of information on how to integrate river values and during incidents. The national system of wild and scenic rivers is a pretty obscure system, and it's pretty common that you won't find information about what you're supposed to do to protect wild and scenic rivers. And so a lot of times what happens is we're doing these things anyway in an interdisciplinary fashion in our organization, so that we have archaeologists, botanists, fishery specialists, hydrologists, recreation specialists attending to their resource, but they may not really be operating under that wild and scenic rivers protect and enhance framework. They're just protecting their resources as they know them as best they can. A wild and scenic river designation is an organizing requirement that cuts across all these disciplines and jurisdictions. You kind of think of it as like an umbrella concept that unifies river management. And lastly, I really want to emphasize this. I think this point is really important about rivers, and that is an understanding their human and social dimensions. There's often crossovers with other functions on a team when you're dealing with rivers, say like the Rogue Wild and Scenic River, with the public affairs officers, the liaison officers, team members, potentially all the way up to the incident commander, and then that coordination with the agency administrator. So protecting and enhancement of wild and scenic river value should always be an incident resource management objective. And that's for designated rivers, as well as those agency identified eligible or suitable wild and scenic rivers. They have kind of these interim protections. We are required to protect those river values on eligible and suitable rivers until Congress has time to make a decision whether those rivers should be added to the national system or not. And information about these can be hard to find. Use local knowledge. That local knowledge is essential. Learn what to look for if you have wild and scenic rivers on your unit that you might be interacting with, and seek out that management guidance. You may have to look in 4 or 5 or 6 different places, so it's important to plan ahead and prepare. And again, don't be surprised if you have to look around for the details. Management plans for wild and scenic rivers are often pretty dated. They have outdated guidance for managing wildfire. For example, on the river I manage, the Rogue Wild and Scenic River, it only discusses a full suppression strategy for wildfire. It doesn't even entertain prescribed fire or wildland fire use, things like that. Vague or totally absent statements of outstandingly remarkable values. So you may be scratching your head and trying to find these. Multiple planning documents across which you need to do some research. You may or may not find information on wild and scenic rivers in the WFDS or in the fire management plan. It's supposed to be there, but sometimes that's a coin toss. And then it's not uncommon to kind of encounter some little operational guidance under this wild and scenic rivers rubric, or within an incident action plan, or there just isn't a lot of guidance out there about how to deal with these things.
Hey, Kai, Pete jumping in a second.
Yeah.
Just a time check. Got about 9 or 10 minutes left.
Okay. Yeah, great. I'll just about wrapping up here.
Copy, thanks.
So focus, if you're dealing with wild and scenic rivers, focus on the most urgent social ecological issues or threats. And a few of these are invasive species, particularly aquatic invasives. Really, really important for the structure and function of rivers. Water quality, short and long-term effects on water quality. Conserving riparian vegetation, upland vegetation cover, so big trees next to rivers, riparian vegetation along the shoreline, things like that. And emphasis on these human dimensions of river conservation. So maybe it's tribal engagement, tribal involvement, or community relationships, things like that. Really important with wild and scenic rivers. Roads, that should be fire lines, and post-fire unmanaged recreation. So suppression, repair, and emergency stabilization can be really important for the long-term function of rivers post-fire. Few tips and tricks. Try not to use wild and scenic rivers as active control lines or administrative boundaries. It often creates confusion. Firefighters love to do that because fire often stops at rivers or significant large streams. But it can cause problems when rivers are treated as control lines. Something you want to watch out for. We do it all the time, but you just want to be heads up about that. Try to keep dozer lines out of wild and scenic river corridors if you can. Seek alternatives. Maybe consult first on opening old roads or new travelways within wild and scenic rivers, and then really make an effort post-fire to ensure that those get closed up sufficiently so that they don't become OHV routes. Riparian vegetation and upland vegetation. Fire effects from burnout operations is increasingly a consideration. And lately we've been seeing some, the kind of intensity of fires in wild and scenic rivers, particularly in Oregon in 2020, on a number of wild and scenic rivers in Oregon that were just burned very, very hot, were very destructive fires. Managing the public closures with sensitivity and consideration, leaving woody debris in streams, and then always implementing those aquatic invasive water quality protection standards for your wild and scenic rivers. MIST principles for wild classified rivers. Just a few words quickly on suppression, repair, and stabilization. So as always, on every incident dealing with resources, just pay attention to those suppression repair needs and how they may interact with wild and scenic river values in the short term and the long term. And then during ESR stabilization as well, there's lots of considerations for wild and scenic river values, including weed control, facility repair, sediment delivery, culvert repair, water quality, and drinking water systems, urban drinking water systems perhaps, or agricultural water delivery systems. Here's a few resources really quick that can help you find more information about managing wild and scenic rivers. So the Interagency Wild and Scenic Rivers Coordinating Council is a national group. I actually work for BLM, representing BLM on the Interagency Council. There's some great resources on the website rivers.gov. The National Park Service maintains the database called the Nationwide Rivers Inventory, and that can be helpful for understanding and identifying those eligible or suitable segments, those agency protected segments of rivers. And then Wilderness Connect is a pretty valuable place for learning about fire and wilderness management. And there's some great toolboxes there on Wilderness Connect related to mist and things like that, fighting fire in wilderness. So lastly, hopefully I'll leave a little bit of time for a few questions and some interactions. I'm willing to stay a little bit longer if folks want to be able to do that as well. So just bear in mind with wild and scenic rivers that 0.5% of all U.S. rivers are designated components of the national system of wild and scenic rivers, and these places are protected for the benefit and enjoyment of present and future generations. So with that, Pete, I think I'm ready. If there's any questions or comments or experiences to share, I'll turn the camera back on and hand it back over to you.
Kai, thank you. I've been scribbling away and capturing screenshots while you've been talking, and really appreciate your ability to kind of condense down some pretty complicated stuff into something that we can digest. I appreciate your willingness to stay on past, and folks, encourage you to stay on, and you know, you're welcome to raise your hand, come off mute if you have questions for Kai. The first one from the chat, Kai, is just more of a comment from one of the participants that, boy, it's unfortunate in our use of terminology and semantics that ORV in a lot of people's mind means off-road vehicle, or and not outstandingly remarkable value, right?
Yeah, outstandingly remarkable values. You know, Congress handed us a mouthful there for sure. It's kind of an unwieldy term. But, you know, one of the things about that is we talk about values at risk, right? We're always talking about values at risk, and that's a really important concept that we integrate. But these are outstandingly remarkable values at risk, right? They're outstandingly remarkable values. So you really want to pay attention to those and protect them to the extent that we can.
Copy that. Tom DeMayo, I see your hand up, Tom.
Good morning, everyone. Excellent presentation. Thanks, Kai. In my experience with wild and scenic river corridors, we try to protect them, of course. It's a very, very high value resource. I'm fully on board with that. But inevitably, operations will ask for exceptions. And I get what you're saying about, well, if they want a dozer line, go to a hand line. So that's what we usually do. Can you expand on that? If you have any further advice or direction, how can we do that job better?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tom, and it's really the bread and butter of what we do as resource advisors is trying to find that middle road of, you know, protecting those values, but also meeting incident management objectives as well, which are obviously significant. That's why we're here. It's a wildfire emergency. Yeah, how do we do that? It's a really good question. In my experience, I think it comes with a lot of educating. It comes with those relationships. So working with division supervisors, helping the team understand what those responsibilities are so that they can consider that in their planning and as they're developing strategies and tactics. You know, so here's an example, Tom, on a fire on the Rogue a number of years ago. There was a burnout operation out in front of the fire, and they had time. So it was days away, so they had time to prep it and prepare for it. And one of the things that happened, unfortunately, is they when they did light it, they lit it at night, but they lit it really hot. They just put too much fire down on the ground. They used the river as a control line, and they burned it really, really hot. And the location of this happened to have been on a piece of private land, but also agency federal land as well. And they caused a lot of tree mortality. And so on the Rogue, Wild and Scenic River, scenery is one of the most important of those values that we try to conserve. And in this case, there really wasn't a need to burn it that hot. But I think in this case, the firefighters who were implementing that, Division Soup and other managers involved, they just didn't really know that that scenery was a really, really important value, and that there was a different way of going about this, and particularly if you have time, that would have been effective to meet the incident management objectives, but also conserve those river values. So Tom, it's a great question, and that's really the art and science and the skill set of being a resource advisor.
Yeah, thanks, Kai. And folks, I'll just say a few things here as we hit our normal end time, which is thank you all for participating today. And thank you for both Cedar in providing us some important updates in the work that's going on that's hidden from a lot of us, some important stuff there. And also to Kai for sharing his knowledge and in a very digestible way with us today. Kai will be staying on for a bit if folks have additional questions, but I know that some of you have other pressing needs to get to, and we budget an hour. So thanks for participating, folks. If you're able to hang on a little, we'll keep on going. I do see Olivia has a question. Go ahead, Olivia.
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much for that presentation. I had a pretty specific question, I guess, just about a best management practice with large woody debris, because sometimes in the past, you'll see really big hazard trees fell directly into the rivers, or sometimes the root wads are pushed alongside. And I guess I was wondering if you had a quick tip for kind of where to draw the line with, preventing the river from being dammed and altering hydrologic flow, but also letting that material stay within its environment.
Oh yeah, Olivia, that's a great question. And woody debris in rivers, post-fire woody debris can be a real threat to boaters. So if it's a stretch of river that gets boated frequently, this can be a real concern, safety hazard for boaters. And I don't think there's a simple answer to that. I think to the extent that you can leave as much woody debris in that river as possible, while meeting those other objectives. Woody debris is just critical to the structure and function of rivers and fish habitat, that complexity that rivers offer. So leave it if you can. And then, of course, during incident operations, if firefighters are developing pump sites or things like that, try to emphasize leaving woody debris in those streams. Whether or not it's a wild and scenic river, it's just really the right thing to do for streams and rivers. But yeah, major consideration post-fire.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Folks, I'll just remind you that this presentation will be posted within a few days on both the new Resource Advisor Learning Library on the Wildland Fire Learning Portal. And we'll have, if we can get Kai's presentation in in a format that's a little smaller than his original. We'll try to post that on the Read Cohort Google Drive. So a couple different ways to review this afterwards. And as Kai said, rivers.gov is a pretty excellent resource for all things WSR related.
Yeah,
Folks,
and for
other
everybody
questions?
too,
Yep.
you know, I avail myself at any time for questions. You got my contact information. Even if during incidents, flip me an email or give me a call or something like that, and I'd be glad to help out wherever I can. Wild and scenic rivers are complicated. They are hard to figure out, and it usually takes some digging to get to the bottom of things.
Folks, feel free to come off mute or raise your hand or put anything into the chat if you have a specific question for Kai. Some good thank yous coming in, Kai. I'm not sure if you're seeing the chat at the moment, but a lot of folks appreciated your presentation.
Great. Yeah. Thanks everybody for being here. I just think that this READ cohort and the work that that everybody's doing and the engagement in resource advising is just fantastic. So thank you to everybody for being here.
Yeah, just kind of scrolling through a little bit here, Kai. Awesome, man. I think, I think you nailed a lot of stuff. You took us from the big end of the funnel down to some specific stuff like, okay, if Pete with zero background in wild and scenic rivers is on a fire as a reed or a reef and realizes that rivers is a piece of the puzzle, what do I need to be thinking about and where can I go to get some more information? So that's awesome.
Yeah, that's great. There's one takeaway for wild and scenic rivers. I mean, sort of the big take-home message that you leave this presentation with. It's protect and enhance water quality, free-flowing conditions of that river, which most fires don't influence free-flowing condition, but they could. Water quality, free-flowing condition, and those outstandingly remarkable values. If you get that, and you can start implementing that and working with a team and doing some research on that, you've got 80% of wild and scenic rivers. And then also related to that too, another big point is the kind of river that it is. So it's different if it's a designated river versus the requirements for protecting those river values on agency eligible or suitable rivers, those study rivers. That's important as well. Yeah.
Good question just came in from Yvonne. Where is the authoritative list of both designated and eligible rivers? Is that rivers.gov or the NPS river inventory, Kai?
Yeah, both, all of the above. Yeah, so rivers.gov is really a great resource. It is the national resource for designated rivers. And then there's this thing called the Nationwide Rivers Inventory. And though that's a great repository for eligible and suitable rivers. So that's managed by the National Park Service under the Act. And that's a great place. They have a great website where you can go and look at for those nationwide river inventory rivers. And then lastly, for agency eligible and suitable rivers that may not be in the nationwide rivers inventory. And this is pretty common. So you need to look at your unit land resources management plan or your park management plan and look at the section on wild and scenic rivers. Sometimes you have to go through like 2 plans. So it may be the current plan, but also the old plan, depending on how the agency addressed planning for eligible and suitable wild and scenic rivers. Those can be tricky to find, but there is no centralized place for the national system where you can see a list of all the agency eligible wild and scenic rivers. But stay tuned, people are working on this.
So if it's officially designated by Congress as either wild or scenic, it's in the list. It's those agency eligible where things get a little squishy.
Yeah, that's really comes down to local research in your local unit management plans. Or there may be a separate study. So on some units, you know, they'll maybe in the national forest, they'll go through identifying eligible and suitable wild and scenic rivers and identify some preliminary outstandingly remarkable values. But they don't do the follow-up step, which is called suitability. And sometimes suitability might be a separate report from the land and resources management plan. So sometimes they do it within planning. Sometimes it happens in a separate NEPA document or a separate planning procedure outside of their lands and resources management plan. It's kind of sometimes on these rivers, it can be a little bit like an onion. Sometimes you might need to go into supplemental environmental impact statements or recreation plans that deal with that wild and scenic river, in addition to the comprehensive river management plan, to find this information.
So I just had one more quick question. I just sent it in the chat, but is this data set with all the rivers along with their designations and, you know, the associated quantitative information publicly available for download and something we could be, I mean, I know the GIS maps have a lot of hydrologic information, but do they have those designations already?
Yeah, so rivers.gov for the designated rivers. And then the U.S. Forest Service actually is the maintainer of the database, in addition to the Park Service. So Park Service and Forest Service is the maintainer of the official record of designations, and it's available in GIS to bring into the incident. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you both, Stephen, as well.
I don't know if they have a connection like with the NIFC server. I'm not certain about that. Should be. I would think that data is also available in the GIS layers through NIFC as well.
Olivia and Steve Chesterson's helping us out with the link that gets right to that on the rivers.gov site.
Oh,
Thanks,
excellent,
Steve.
excellent. Yeah, great. Thanks to my colleagues out there who joined the presentation. Thank you.
Kai, I'll say thanks again, man. Looks like things are slowing down. Had sort of a flurry of side messages on my phone when I interrupted you and gave you the time check. They're like, "Don't cut him off, Pete. Don't cut him off."
Well, yeah, it was a little short and I had some technical difficulties there. I did figure out that, you know, it's this, so I'm a DOI employee and it's, this Teams call was on Forest Service. And so it wasn't letting me share my screen for some reason. So I had to disconnect and then go on to the Forest Service side to connect.
Really? Because we
not sure why that is.
Using, like when Lynn Gassaway changed from Forest Service to Park Service, we changed the Teams link to her Park Service Teams link, I thought, but that's beyond this old dinosaur. Glad you figured it out, Kai.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, so, yep. Well, great. Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for listening. Hit me up if you have any questions. Look me up during incidents or whatever. There's always folks out there that can help you work through these things at, you know, the regional, national level, myself included, members of the Interagency Wild and Scenic Rivers Council, folks out there that can help you work through these things. So, yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to see everybody here. All right. See you next time. Thanks.
Kai, thank you. Folks, last chance for questions. I'm going to shut things down here in a minute. Good deal, Kai.
All right.